Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the industry update. John and Melissa will be bringing to you what has happened over the last few days. As always, we will be recording this webinar and sending it out and posting it on our website afterwards. Please be sure to mute your lines and use the chat feature, sending chats to the entire group so that we can all see the questions. And they will address us at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John to kick us off.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us again this week. As a reminder, this webinar is designed for our restaurant, hotel, travel and tourism, and other friends of PRLA partners. And it's not on the record, it's off the record. It's not designed for the press. We entertain any and all press calls, but just not at this time. So if you're with the press, please disconnect. Also, I wanted to point out that today's webinar is being presented by Food Shelter Public Relations Firm. As PRLA's partner for PR services, Food Shelter has developed press materials and provided local, regional, and national media outreach. And I cannot begin to tell you how invaluable they have been to us throughout the pandemic in generating literally billions of impressions, particularly about some of the business crippling, job killing orders that are coming down out of the governor's office. The firm specializes in the hospitality segment with clients across the food and beverage spectrum. Please visit food-shelter.com and learn more about the great services that they can provide for you. Before we get started, we're going to be talking a lot about House Bill 2513 today, which is critically important to our industry, both restaurants and private events. And we're also, of course, going to be talking about the governor's order that came down yesterday. And this is going to be repeated later by Melissa and also by me, but I want to make something very clear. It's being reported to legislators and others that PRLA collaborated in some of the decisions that have come out of the governor's office. This is clearly being done to try to play off of the credibility that PRLA has within the legislature in Harrisburg, which is immense, and to derail 2513. PRLA had a very good collaborative relationship with the Governor Wolf team up until the week prior to July 15th. The reason why the green reopening orders were as smooth as they were and frankly fairly reasonable and well balanced was because PRLA was consulted throughout the formulation of those. The reason there was outdoor dining in yellow is because PRLA worked with the governor to allow that and to put it smoothly into place. Why that ended on July 15th, we still do not have an answer for. And while they have been telling us about what they're doing, we have not had a chance to weigh in as much as we begged them to please let us help to make good decisions instead of the decisions that are being made now, like we did when we were working with them. So when you hear legislators tell you that they were told by the governor's office that PRLA has worked with them on this order and other recent orders, that's not true. It's false, and it's designed to try to derail 2513. We'll talk more about 2513 later, but I thought it was important to get that on the front end there. We pointed out a lot of problems with yesterday's order, and we were notified about probably 15 minutes before the rest of the state was, and basically none of those have been addressed, but we'll cover more of that later. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Bova. Melissa, all yours.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, I'm not very creative. So when it came to figuring out what my Zoom background should be for this week's call, I felt going as literal in terms of my feeling would be appropriate. So we can get started in terms of how things are going generally. Funny story for those of you who participated in last week's webinar. My internet froze and I froze on the screen and the webinar got stalled. So this morning, as I was drinking my coffee and getting ready for work, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if my internet just crashed again and we couldn't do the webinar? And I get into the office and Hope and Eric were 3 steps ahead of me and hardwired my computer into the internet. So there's no way that I can freeze at this point. So they were a few steps ahead of me in terms of what I was hoping for and what they did. So you don't You don't get rid of me today. Let's talk about federal, because unfortunately, I don't have good news on a lot of different fronts. And every week, I hope that it'll be a week that we can kind of have a nice little chat and update you on general things. And this is turning into another week that really has gone arrears. So I don't know if you heard, but President Trump got COVID. And whether he spread it or somebody else did, most of his administration, I think we're up to 24 people, have also gotten COVID, which has not only put the entire campaign season, turned that on its head, it also has impacted a lot of the action in Congress. So we do not know how this is going to turn out. We're certainly seeing some behavior from the administration that I think even makes us cringe a little bit, but it certainly has hurt our efforts in terms of a stimulus package. And a lot of you saw this announcement that came out yesterday. I don't know if it was the medication that he's on or not, but the governor did announce that his top priority is to confirm a new Supreme Court justice, not to pass a COVID relief package. And he has instructed his team not to negotiate any further on that front. That is literally the worst news that as an industry we could have received yesterday, because we were pushing very hard. Our national associations were pushing very hard in terms of getting something across the finish line, especially or at minimum a second drawdown of that P3. The president later last night tweeted again, tweeting as his form of communication that he would support, a second round of P3, but that at that point the die had been cast. And honestly, if that was a conversation that his administration was willing to have a few weeks ago, I think we would have gotten something across the finish line. So from what we're hearing from our national folks, the announcement from the president really just ruined any hopes of negotiation, of getting something across the finish line. And of course, as you all know, that's what we were waiting for in terms of a second round of relief. So where's the future on this? There is not an expectation, even when they come back for a lame duck session in DC, that a recovery package will be part of that. It could be, but we're certainly going to go through the next month at least without any type of recovery package. And I think that is absolutely going to impact elections this year. I can't figure out which group is going to be impacted the most. I think part of the irony of all of this is that nobody ever wanted to stop negotiating because nobody wanted to be the party that stopped negotiating. And then the president decided that he was going to announce it, which I think is going to hurt his party in the end, especially when businesses are especially impacted by this. So unfortunately, we do not expect a federal recovery package at this time. The stock market did go down about 500 points when that announcement was made yesterday. So maybe the leadership will have a difference of opinion over the course of today. But as of yesterday, negotiations have stopped and the focus has resumed to be on a new Supreme Court justice. So not, unfortunately, the kind of news that I was hoping to deliver on the federal front for this week. Next slide. Okay. So all kinds of updates, so many updates. House Bill 2513, this is top priority number one. You should be dreaming about it and dreaming about how much better all of our lives will be if we can override a veto on this or get the governor to sign it. It is currently on the governor's desk and the timeline has shifted. Everybody seemed to think, including as I was told, that the governor had 10 business days to sign it. He actually has 10 days from when it hits his desk. So he has until October 16th to determine what he wants to do, which means that we could have that override vote as early as the 19th if he does veto the bill. So it is on his desk. The clock has begun. Now is the absolute time that you need to start reaching out to your elected officials. Republicans, yes, we know they're with us. We know they're going to vote for it. The focus needs to really be on every single Democrat, especially those Democrats, one, who voted for the bill. We need them to keep their yes vote with us and override a veto. And two, we will be providing a list of all of those Democrats who voted for the sports bill and then flipped their vote on the override. And we want to make sure we put pressure on all of them. So it doesn't matter if you are a constituent or not, you are a business owner in the state of Pennsylvania and people need to hear from you. So please start making those phone calls, sending those emails. I am toying with doing a form email, but again, I think you all got to see the response that we received when you reached out specifically to legislators and told them your story, as opposed to a form email that you can copy and paste. So please, 2513, as John mentioned, that is the only thing I think that is going to get us to somewhere where we can possibly survive, because I have never been more frustrated, and I've been frustrated a lot over the past 6.5 months, as I have been with this administration and what seems to be a complete and total disconnect in terms of guidance and responding to the needs of the industry. Further on House Bill 2513, John already mentioned it. With the governor making the announcement he did yesterday, he's trying to draw votes away from us. Unfortunately, and we'll get into that, we think he completely missed the mark in terms of that announcement. We think his team completely missed the mark. And they didn't consider the negative repercussions of the announcement they made yesterday. But what he did was he did open up those sports venues. And by bundling with us, he made a mistake, which we'll talk about. But by opening up the sports venues, he kind of came through on a promise he made to those Democrats who flipped their vote on the override. So that's one concern I have. Is he going to make a lot of empty promises again to people to try and get them not to support us? And then two, there really is, what we're hearing from these Democrats is the concern that if we see an increase in cases this fall, the governor needs the ability to shut the industry down again. And this bill would take that away. It doesn't allow us to open up 100%, but we would not be allowed to operate at below 50%. And we know we can do that safely. But we're hearing a lot of that as well. And the governor is really driving that home. John testified at a hearing last week. And if it couldn't get much more political in terms of Secretary of Health Levine really just saying that restaurants are the problem without an ounce of data to actually back it up. So this is not, I know you were passionate when we needed 2513 passed. I need you even more passionate in terms of reaching out to those House Democrats and moving the needle. You can reach out to the Senate right now, but the first vote has to be in the House. And if the House doesn't override a veto, the Senate's can't either. So the focus really does have to be the House. Grant program update. With there being, not that this is a silver lining, is there ever a silver lining? With the feds not coming up with any type of recovery package, the state will need to spend its CARES Act dollars or allocate it by the end of this year, by December 31st. So we are continuing to work on a recovery grant program for the hospitality and tourism industry. The goal is to be inclusive of restaurants, hotels, destination marketing organizations, and tourism attractions as needed in terms of a grant program. So that is still being discussed. We're working with leadership on that. A lot of people want that money. A lot of people are asking for that money, but I think we're making a strong case that our industry needs it probably more than anyone else. It's not going to be whatever we get done. It's not going to save you at the end of the day, not like a robust federal package would, but I mean, any type of grant program that puts some funds into your hands to help you get through the winter, I think needs to be a priority of ours right now. So in terms of what we're working on, it's really 2513 veto override and pulling together a grant program that will get some of those funds into your hands. Other items that happened this week, House bills, the Senate Law and Justice Committee has moved 2 bills. One actually, if you old school PRLA members remember that this was a PRLA priority pre-COVID, which is House Bill 1617, but they did move out House Bill 763. For my clubs that are on the call, it would allow club license holders to sell up to 192 ounces of malt and brewed beverages to go, something that you're not permitted to do right now. So that bill did get moved out of committee with a vote of 7-2. And then House Bill 1617, for those of you who might have this license, there's only about 300-ish in the state, but allows those holders of a hotel license that was established before 1949 and eliminated the room requirement, which means nothing to 90% of you on the call, but it would allow those H licenses to convert that license to an R license. So those are licenses that have been operating like a restaurant for years, but because they have a hotel license, they can't sell that license, they can't move that license. This would allow them to convert it to a restaurant license and sell, move, or have some value to a license that had no value before. So both of those bills did move out of committee. House 1617 actually could get to the governor's desk by the end of the month if it keeps on plugging along. And we do expect him to sign that one, which would be a refreshing change for PRLA's priorities. And then House Bill 763 was amended and will have to go back to the House. So there was some liquor movement, at least on those bills. And we're going to see more of that. And I'll get there to that in a minute. We're reaching the end of session. And once we get to the end of this session, every bill that's been filed is dead. You have to refile it in 2021 and start from scratch with it. So that's why we're seeing a lot of bills that you might like kind of shake your head at, like, why are we moving that? It's because if they don't go now, they have to start the process from the beginning in 2021. So we're seeing a lot of tchotchke bills also get moved through the Capitol to get to the governor's desk. VGTs, not that you want to see anything entertaining, but if you want to see a lot of adults in the room picking at each other and not making any type of reasonable sense and refusing to work together, you should have watched the video gaming terminal hearing that occurred in the Senate committee yesterday. So there was a hearing on Senator Corman's bill, which would allow games of skill and VGTs, would legalize them and allow them to operate within restaurants and taverns. The problem, of course, that we have with all of this, I think I've talked about it before, is the fact that the VGTs want to be legalized. The games of skill think that they're different from VGTs and therefore they should already be legal and shouldn't be included in the bill. And then the casinos oppose everything because it would take away money from the casinos. And you don't even want to think about how much money lobbyists are being paid between those three entities to either push, pull, or stop a bill from happening. So there was a hearing yesterday. I don't expect any action on that right now. The three sides are just so far apart. But I think VGTs are something that are going to continue to be discussed going into next year in terms of legalizing them for restaurants, bars, and taverns. Session insights. As I mentioned before, we did have a COVID case in the House last week. There haven't been any other cases that have stemmed from it, but COVID is starting to impact session operations and the concerns of having people in the Capitol. We're also seeing legislators get increasingly antsy in terms of putting up votes for bills when they're trying to run for re-election. So as I mentioned this week, the House canceled session for this week. House and Senate, as of right now, their last week of session is going to be the week of October 19th. But that's because they don't schedule session after an election, and they have not scheduled session after an election since 2006 or 7. So as of right now, that is scheduled to be the last week of session. It's 50-50 if they will come back after the election. They do have to get a budget done. They do need to spend those CARES dollars that they haven't yet. So I think they're going to have to come back and do something. We're just not sure of how much they're actually going to want to do, just because we don't know how this election is going to shake out. And of course, it's going to be up to the legislature to determine if they want to return. So like I said, we're seeing a wind down in terms of session. The question will be if they come back next month to get a ton of stuff done, if they come back next month to check a few boxes, or if they don't and just decide to come back in January and start afresh with a brand new session. So that's where we are in terms of that. And of course, we do have a commitment from the House that they will come back and do a veto override if the governor does veto 2513. So as I mentioned, that continues to be top priority. So make that your drinking game for today's webinar. Every time I say 2513, you can take a drink. Next slide. Court cases, just so full of good news this week. So the Third Circuit issued a stay, and on my webinar last week, I think I mentioned a few times that as of today, Wednesday at 11:20, you can operate events at 50%, but that could change at any time. And of course, on Thursday, the Third Circuit, as a body in and of itself, issued a stay and reinstituted Governor Wolf's indoor-outdoor guidelines of 25 people indoors, 250 outdoors for events. So that did happen last week. Also, there was another court case that had to do with the business shutdowns and the impact of COVID. This didn't get a lot of news. There was an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Again, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear that case. So we're we're seeing the US Supreme Court basically say, we're not dealing with COVID. And we're seeing other courts essentially say, I don't know if it's because they're scared of COVID. They don't want to be the ones that overturn a ruling or guidance in a state that could lead to an increase in COVID. I'm not sure what it is, but the courts are really holding all of these issues at arm's length and doing their best to really not deal with them or allow guidance to continue in its current form until they have their hearing. So we do expect the Third Circuit to hear that appeal as from the state, because obviously the state is appealing. Judge Stickman did rule that the stay-at-home order, the business shutdowns, and the gatherings were unconstitutional. So there is an appeal on the state to the Third Circuit. To that end, with the announcement that came out yesterday with the new gathering limits, it's kind of a moot point for our industry because the 25-250 isn't in play anymore, and that's what the suit was filed on. So these new event guidelines really change the entire hope that I think we had in the Third Circuit kind of ruling that 25-250 was unconstitutional. So not good news on any front in terms of the court cases. I'm sorry, I have no good news this week. I'm trying, but I've no good news. So next steps, like I said, there will be an appeal to the Third Circuit, but at this point, there's not really anything that's going to change the state of play or what we're dealing with now, unless House Bill 2513 is signed by the governor or we get a veto override. Next. Okay, I'm like building up to these new guidelines yesterday because I'm I have such a headache about them. Self-certification, if you haven't certified, you should certify. Obviously, this is not going away. If we do a veto override, it's not going to be till the 19th. And I've already heard the LCE and Department of Ag are going gangbusters. So if you have not certified and you are operating at 50%, you need to certify. It's not ideal, but at the end of the day, the misdemeanor concern we were worried about became a moot point, at least in terms of what the administration addressed relating to it. And if you look at it, the only information there that's different than what's on your liquor license or your food license is if you are a minority women or veteran-owned business, and then of course your occupancy, which could change depending on the event as it is anyway. So do I think you're going to get shut down if an LCE agent walks in and you're not certified the first time? No, but I think they'll come in the next day. And if you're not certified, you will get penalized for that. And part of the penalization for that is that you will be permanently required to stay at 25%. So if you have not self-certified, I would suggest that you do so. And of course, that does only apply to restaurant operations at 50%. It does not apply to event spaces or any of that. So you do not need to certify unless you have a public-facing, public-serving restaurant and you want to go to that 50% capacity. John, can you just kick this off while I lay my head on my desk for a few minutes and give some background?
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, the governor put into place a new order that is designed to affect indoor and outdoor gatherings. And I should start from the beginning by saying we have been imploring the governor's team since July 15th to return to the concept that there is a difference between a private event and a public gathering, as was defined in the original orders when we came out with the green phase, and there was a so-called discrete private event. They've abandoned that and grouped private events in with public events, which is problematic for private events for a number of reasons and illogical for countless reasons, not the least of which in a private event, you know all of the attendees that are there and you have tracing data for 14 days looking forward. That said, I can't explain why they can't grasp that concept. So because of they're trying to link private events to public events, this all becomes problematic. As Melissa pointed out earlier, this is probably designed to increase the occupancy for outdoor events, in particular for sporting events, and it probably has something to do with the override of, the sustaining of the school sports bill. That said, It also applies to outdoor events that we may be doing, whether they're private events or public events, as well as indoor events. So currently, indoor, you can do 25 people in an event, and outdoor 250. As of Friday, you'll use a relatively complicated and convoluted formula to determine how many you can do. Indoor, it's a little bit simpler to calculate. You simply take your fire code occupancy. And if your fire code occupancy would allow for somewhere between 0 and 2,000 people, you can then have 20% for that event. If your fire code occupancy would allow for 2001 to 10,000 people, you could have 15%.
Eric, can you go to the next slide? Just so, because John, we do have a slide on it, just so then people can see what you're talking about.
And over 10,000, you can go to 10%. Here it is here. And this is right from the governor's FAQ, which Ben will probably pop that up there if he hasn't already, so you can pull that up if you'd like. Now, very quickly, Melissa, because she's very bright, figured out that there are some challenges because if you're in the 2001 to 10,000 category and you go down to 15%, you can actually have less people than you could have if you were in the lower category. So they have been making adjustments throughout the night. And I think that's one of the things they adjusted. So you can essentially choose your category, whichever gives you the maximum amount, as long as you don't exceed the overall maximum, which for indoor is 3,750. Outdoor is similar. It's the same grid, except that you have a bigger, a larger percentage, 0 to 2,000, 25%, so on and so forth. I won't go through the whole grid there, with a total of up to 7,500 people for outdoor. Now, what complicates, there are other nuances to this that don't make sense. For example, if you have a room that could normally accommodate 100 people based on fire code inside, right now you can have 25 people. In the new grid, you can only have 20 people. And we pointed that out on the call, and they were not able to rectify that. So that's one of the nuances. Outdoors is a problem for many of you that are using tents. For example, Melissa gave the example to them. If you have an 80 by 110 square foot, 80 foot by 110 foot tent, which is fairly common, that's a big tent, 8,800 square feet. Currently, you can have 250 people, the maximum allowed outdoors, and you can have very sufficient social distancing. Under the new guidelines, you could only have 147 people, which is a problem, going to be a problem for maybe thousands of weddings again, which we've pointed out. I don't know whether that's being rectified. Melissa may be able to weigh in on that a bit later, but I don't think that's been rectified as of yet. They also, in this document, which is kind of the living FAQ that could change hourly, there's a lot of other changes made last night that we were unaware of until Melissa researched it and went through it line by line, such as in the old one, there was some discretion as to sides on the tent, whether you had to have sides up or down, or there was discretion allowed. It appears there's no longer discretion allowed that two sides have to be open, which is again a problem for those of you who have booked events in tents for cold weather based on the past guidelines. So there's suffice it to say, there's a lot of issues that still need to be worked out. There's changes throughout the FAQ. We've tried to go through, and particularly Melissa has, to figure out what are the changes, because they don't highlight them, they just change. And then, so you really have to reread the entire thing. We'll try to get all that for you if we haven't already, so you don't have to read every line again, but you should be looking at the FAQ on a pretty regular basis. Ben pointed out that I didn't describe the new formula to determine how many people you can have in an outside space when there is no fire code capacity. We asked this question on the call, and the answer is you use a calculator. Like if you have a field and you want to know how many people you can have in the field, use a calculator of 67 people per 1,000 square feet. And then you multiply that times the factor, either 25, 20, or 15%, depending on the total number of people that you get out of that formula when you do the 67 per 1,000 square feet. So that's that's what happens with that's how this is being put into place. And I will say that during the call, we saw it for the very first time, and Melissa was able to raise a number of issues to which there were no answers. Some of those were answered later. Other questions arose that were answered later, and many have not been answered. So with that, I think I'm going to try to turn it back to Melissa and let her comment on it. By the way, there's no change really in restaurants in this, except for the private events in restaurants. There's no relaxation of the meal requirement with food unless you're a distillery or a winery. This is a nuance you'll find in the FAQ. If you're a distillery or a winery, you no longer have to make people buy a meal to do a tasting, a limited tasting. But the bar seating is still prohibited, which makes it difficult for most restaurants to get to 50% capacity. Meal must be purchased with a drink. The curfew is still in place, certification is still in place. So there's no real changes there. The things that impact our industry are simply private events, indoor and outdoor. So with that, Melissa, I'll turn it back to you, and then you can call on me again when you like.
Yeah, and I probably will review in a little bit more detail some of the comments John made, because we do have some slides on those fronts. So hopefully we'll be addressing some of your questions as I go through in a little bit more detail of what we know. This is effective on October 9th, so it is effective Friday. And that's going to get into the winners, losers, and the recent email I received from the governor's office, which it makes everybody a loser in my opinion, but that's fine, that's on them. As John mentioned, this guidance only impacts the guidance for private events. So it doesn't impact any of the general restaurant operations, the prohibitions and everything that apply to restaurants. Now, it does impact private events within a restaurant. So if you are a restaurant, don't think that you can do 50% and go gangbusters for private events. So general operations, as John mentioned, nothing's changed. All of those things that we've been banging the drum about, nothing has changed. All they've done is change private events, and for a lot of you, for the worst. And as I said, the order applies to which businesses, and this is where it gets really a bit of a mess. And this is, I think, where a lot of the frustration came. The governor's office wanted to be uniform in terms of capacity for events. But when they created this, because of their desire to be uniform, they bundled private events like weddings, funerals, birthday parties with large sports events. And the guidance, if you read it, you can clearly see makes perfect sense if you are a high school sports stadium or a field, or you are at Heinz Field and watching the Steelers game, and you have tens of thousands of square feet. Makes a lot of sense if you're one of those venues. It became so clear yesterday that they did not think about the private event space and what we're doing. But it does apply to any type of private event. So as I said, any event that's not public coming in and having a meal, these do apply to them. Winners, as I mentioned, if you have a giant ballroom, you can operate at 20%. I don't even know if I would call that a win, but it's better than 25 people. So if you have large ballrooms, you can accommodate a few more people than you could before. Within our sphere is the only win that I can come up with. And trust me, I've been looking at this for over 24 hours now. Losers, it's all of us. I feel like one of the losers. So losers are, one, if you have a small space, if you're a restaurant that can only seat, as John mentioned, 100 or 75 people, your private event at 20% just dropped you down to 20 people or 15 people, if that's all your restaurant can fit. So it's definitely, you are in the losing end of this if you are a smaller restaurant that's looking to do Christmas parties or anything like that by renting out your space. You've now just been restricted even further. Losers also, as John mentioned, there has been no thought put into the outdoor tent spaces, because obviously you needed to socially distance your tables. You need to ensure people were wearing masks. So a lot of you were doing your 150, 200 person weddings at a large tent outside. Now with this new calculation, your tent capacity has just been reduced. You're lucky if only by half under these new rules. We pushed back hard on the administration on all of these points. I did receive an email response today from the administration. It's not good, but they're going to be updating the FAQ again this afternoon. So everything I'm telling you now is what I know right now at 11:35, and it's probably going to change later this afternoon. So if you have printed out the FAQ, don't use it as your Bible yet, because it's going to change again. Unfortunately, what we are hearing from the administration is the fact that the outdoor-indoor tent policy is going to remain as drafted. They are looking for further clarification regarding the use of the calculator for outdoor tented events. They did not clarify how that formula is going to be changed, if it's going to be changed to allow you more capacity within a tent, but it does look like they're going to further clarify that. They are not changing the floor. So as we said, before you could have 25 people indoors, but now if you can only seat 75 normally, you're only going to be able to do 15. They're not looking to change that. And then we'll get to bar service in a minute, because I will talk about bar service. So they were looking, like I said, for updates. I did send a very specific email back to the administration. I know you don't want to hear this, but I essentially said, so do I need to tell my members that those who have a wedding in a tent this weekend need to cancel the wedding or change the parameters? And unsurprisingly, it's been crickets since I sent that message. So we're looking for that guidance. We need to focus on this. So in your, again, take a drink 2513, if you are a place that has private events, you need to explain this to your legislators, because this is being touted as a move forward. And for many of you, it is a step backwards. So please articulate that to your legislators, that once again, the governor is missing the mark. In some ways, it's made it worse for you, especially as it pertains to those outdoor tents and all of those heaters and everything that you purchase to have your outdoor tents going. And obviously, again, take another drink, 2513, that would restore us to 50% capacity for indoor events and outdoor events. It would bring us back to 50%. So that is, as John said, that's where the focus needs to be. Clearly, we are not making headway with this governor right now, or the Secretary of Health. So that really needs to be our focus. And as I mentioned, you can clearly see with this guidance that if I were a stadium or a sporting facility, it makes a lot of sense. The application to the day-to-day operations of private events, there's no clear connection, and there are a ton of unanswered questions. Next slide. Okay, but John went over all of this. This one gives me a giant headache. So go to the next slide, Eric. All right, so so last night at around 5:30, I printed out the updated FAQ, and then I went through and I just started highlighting things and all of the changes that happened. So I've listed some of the things that I'm going to go over today, and I'm going to go over tents, so don't ask me another tent question. But these are some of the changes that were made to the FAQs. And this is also frustrating, because there are changes that are constantly being made that we're not told about. So we don't know about them changing, and even the enforcement agencies, I was talking to one last night, didn't know about some of the changes. But they're just changing things. So some of the things that I want to cover, tastings at wineries and distilleries, John mentioned this. This can't even be considered a baby step, but if the governor thinks it's a baby step, that's fine. If you are a winery or distillery, you will now be permitted to do up to 5 1-ounce tasting pours without needing the meal requirement. So I can go to your winery and have 5 tastings of 5 different wines, and I don't need to get a meal. If you want to do more than 5 tastings, you need a meal. If you want a glass of wine, you need a meal. But it eliminated the meal requirement just for tastings at wineries and distilleries up to 5 1-ounce pours. John did mention, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the private event space. They did clarify yesterday, and I call it the on the cusp. So obviously, if you are in the next tier, your 15% for an indoor event actually puts you lower than what 20% would be. They did clarify that you can use the higher number. So if under the one you were at 15%, you could only have 375, but at 20%, you could have had 400. You can have 400. So you can use the higher of the 2 numbers. Again, how many of you have capacity for more than 2,000 people? So again, it's a change that only benefits large sporting venues and large venues generally. I want to talk a little bit about restaurants because I did get this question in terms of restaurant operation. So restaurants can operate at 50%. So that's where your standard is. You can have a private event, and for your private event, you can have up to 20% in that back room, in that back space for your restaurant. And then you can serve general seating at 30% in the rest of the restaurant. So your private event can't be more than 20%. General public service is now reduced to 30% because under no scenario can a restaurant operate above 50%. So I just want to clarify for those of you that might have a private room in the back. If you read the FAQ, there's about 3 pages that goes all the way back to SARS and all types of data as to why our industry is the devil and why we should be mitigated. So if you want to read that and get very angry, I urge you to. They also state in the guidance that most states use a hard cap on events, but Pennsylvania is special. So they came up with this convoluted formula instead. For the indoor outdoor, because that's a question that we've been getting. I did talk about that one. So if you have indoor capacity and outdoor capacity, you can use the indoor and outdoor. So for example, if your capacity under the calculator allows an outdoor capacity of 200, and your indoor capacity is, let's say your outdoor is 200, but your indoor with the formula only allows 30. You can still only have 200 people, but 30 people can be inside at any point in time. So it's really the same thing as before, where we were saying, if you have a wedding for 150 people outdoors, but you want people to flow in and out, you can't have more than 25 people indoors. The same applies here. So if your indoor capacity only allows for 30 people, your outdoor allows for 200, you can't have 230 people. You can only allow 30 people inside at any point in time during that. Okay, let's get into the headaches. Don't freak out. Dance floors are not banned. So we do not have another dance floor gate, thank goodness. Dance floors you're urged not to have them. They are not outright banned. So, I mean, I guess that's something, right? So you can still have your dance floors. You still need to have people socially distanced. They still need to wear their masks. All the other rules and things that were in place before are still in place. Let's get into tents. I'm going to read it verbatim from the guidance. And this changed. I found it last night. And I think I had mentioned this before, because before the guidance said for tents that you should have airflow, but it didn't require you to have walls up. It urged you to, it suggested you to, but it did not say you had to have a wall or 2 walls up on a tent. That has now changed in the vaguest manner that it possibly could. Outdoor dining occurs in a completely or largely open air space, open on at least 2 sides. Stay with me. A tent is allowed for outdoor dining. However, to be regarded as outdoor space, tents should, not have to, should be open on 2 sides. With that being said, they then go a line further and say enclosed tents are considered indoor spaces. So you are not allowed to have all 4 walls down on a tent. They suggest you to have at least 2 walls up on the tent, but they don't say you have to, they suggest it. So could you have 1 wall up on the tent? The way this reads right now, yes, that would be permissible because they're not saying you have to have 2, but you are now no longer allowed to have 4 walls down on the tent. I hope that answers the question as clearly as I possibly can. Okay, bar service, this is great. There will be another clarification on bar service, but we did also flag last night that they did change the ability for you to have bar service. And it looks like they're going to change for regular restaurants as well, not bar seating. Don't get excited. It looks like it might be changing for restaurants as well, which would be, the new guidance says, If an event venue is serving a meal, then an event can serve food and drinks at a walk-up bar service. The venue must have enough seating with a distinct seating dining area, or attendees must be, so they have to have a seat no matter what, but they can now go up to the bar, indoor or outdoors, and get a drink. They still have to have a meal, they still have to have a seat, but you will be allowed to have bar service indoors and outdoors. Further to that end, the governor's office did email us this morning and said that they're clarifying in the FAQ, shocking this afternoon, that bar service, which, as I said, is only going up and getting a drink and going back to your seat, not sitting at the bar, is going to be allowed for regular restaurants plus events. So it looks like that will be a change that will allow you to walk up to the bar and get a drink indoors and outdoors. So that was another change. Items awaiting clarification, everything. I think, again, as John mentioned, it looks like they put this guidance together and then decided to make changes afterwards, which unfortunately has been the case. So I do expect an update this afternoon. I would love to say it's going to be out before the daily update. I'm not going to hold my breath. And we are pushing hard for those of you that are having those outdoor weddings where your capacity is now all of a sudden 2 days out going to change under this new guidance. We're looking for a way to address that and pushing hard on that front. But this is, as I said, another huge reason to start talking to your legislators and pushing back on the fact that once again, the administration is not helping our industry in any way whatsoever, and in a lot of ways are actually hurting the industry. Next, am I getting near the end? So local things, Allegheny County, the Steelers-Eagles game, there will be fans there. So obviously I say it every week, they do a 4 o'clock press conference. Allegheny County did announce last week that they were aligning with the state. So these parameters, our understanding is will also be assessed in Allegheny County. So that new formula for indoor outdoor are all going to be applicable to any event in Allegheny County. Philadelphia, always its own special land. Commissioner Farley said that they will be making an announcement next week. So the current 25-250 in Philadelphia continues to be in place, and they will make an announcement next week if any of that changes. I think we're nearing the end. Webinars, Hope?
Sure, I'll take over real quick. We will be hosting a webinar tomorrow with United Health Group. They're going to be talking about the health and wellness of your employees and making this a top priority, talking about some of the healthcare offerings and that they have and exclusive offers for our members. So please check that out. Next on, and then we will be at, there will be another webinar the same day, National Restaurant Association and DoorDash. It's actually not a webinar, it's a virtual conference. It is free, so check that out. They have some good speakers and good topics going on all day tomorrow, during the day tomorrow. And then on the 22nd, we will be having a webinar with RSI client advisors. You're gonna be talking about cost of goods and best practices. So please join that. Those webinars are only about a half hour, 35 minutes. So it's not that much of your time, and they are presenting some really great information to help you with budgeting and helping you with looking at your cost of goods and on an accounting side, what you could be looking at going into these next few months. On the next webinar, the next page, I wanted to remind everybody scholarships are open. So if you know anybody that is looking for some extra money to go to school next year, please make sure to let them know about that. The virtual experiences, I just wanted to clarify a little on that we are looking for 5 to 10 minute demos or speaking about your operations so that the students in these programs can get a visual of what's going on behind the scenes since they are not able to travel. I can help you work through with the video part of it and the editing part, so please don't let that be a roadblock for helping these programs. And another way to think of it is this is a way for you to be a part of the program, to be talent to your restaurant when you're looking for employees. So it is an important piece for you to be thinking about. As always, we have a lot of training solutions up on our website, different COVID-related training that's free, our ServSafe classes. We have all of our webinars archived, so please go out there and check that out. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Melissa. And there's about 40 questions.
Before I go through those questions, I did get a list that were submitted to me ahead of time, so I'm going to run through those quickly, and then I'll start going through these questions one by one. One thing I do want to remind everybody, Steph, thank you for sending me a text message. Your occupancy counts is inclusive of your staff. Again, it's your staff that's touching the customers, touching your guests, interacting with them. It's not your back of the house staff, but your counts, your new occupancy counts are inclusive of that. One thing I'm going to answer these questions, but I'm going to tell you, I know all of you are total nerds like me. And every day you go on to the 6 different pages of guidance that apply to our industry. And you probably have noticed that a lot of the guidance hasn't really been updated or changed to reflect this. So if you went on the self-certification page yesterday, they still had 25-50 on there. And that's what happens when you have 6 different pages or 6 different departments working on guidance. I have a question. The questions that I got, do you know if a host is still required to keep a list of guests and contacts as well as where the guests will be in 14 days? Yes, under the governor's mitigation document, that is still listed in that document. To that end, it is not referenced in any way left, right, or in between in the Department of Health's FAQ document that I just went over. So I don't know if that is going to be changed, but under the governor's restaurant guidance, they are still requiring a guest list to be continued to be had for a private event, which we're hoping will help drive the conversation that private events that you can maintain that list are inherently different than a sporting event where you cannot. Are we restricted to the number of people at a table? I know there is conversation about a number of people at a 60 or 72 inch round. I know the table needs to be 6 feet apart. Tables still have to be 6 feet apart. They suggest no more than 10 people at a table. Again, that is a suggestion, not a requirement. So I know we've been asked this before. If you have a private event and you have 30 people that want to sit around a table, technically that is permitted as long as that's within your 20% capacity. But the tables, standalone tables in and of themselves, need to be 6 feet apart. Can you have tall tables pulled near the bar and serve drinks from behind the bar to the tables? No. I mean, I get where you're going. So, and I've seen this. We've seen tables that have just been set up right next to the bar, which could be permitted, but you cannot serve them a drink across the bar. That would still be considered bar service, even though you have 4 extra feet, and that bartender must have super long arms, between the bar and the people at the table. Now you can put a table there. The bartender can come around and serve them like he would a customer, but you cannot have him handing a drink over the bar to the table. With the new guidance, that could change a little bit in terms of bar service. I would assume that it's not permissible, because technically you would still be getting served at the bar and eating and drinking that at the bar, but we can look into that. There is and I want to address this. This is where we have the issue between sporting events and others. On the FAQ, there is a thing that say that events are required to do a timed entry to make sure that you don't have hundreds or thousands of people surging into a venue. That is not applicable to the private event space. That's really for your stadiums, your large sports venues that are looking at thousands, hundreds or thousands of people participating. Should you ensure that when the wedding is over and everybody desperately wants a glass of champagne after the wedding ceremony is over to ensure people aren't running into the venue to get that? Yes, but you don't need to have a specific timed entry in that scenario. Another question I had gotten, and then I have 2 more, and then I'll get into these. There's a question about the 11 p.m. cutoff for alcohol service and to-go beverages. You can sell beverages to go after 11 p.m., but the only alcoholic beverages you can sell to go after 11 p.m. is beer, malt and brewed beverages. Your wine expansion permit, if you have one, and cocktails to go, they all end at 11 p.m. But if somebody wants to get a sandwich and a 6-pack at midnight, you can do that until you close at 2 a.m. And then there's another question about BYOBs. Alcohol service, it doesn't matter if you're licensed or not. There cannot be any consumption of alcohol after that midnight ending of service. So it doesn't matter if you're licensed or not. If you're a BYOB, people are bringing in their own alcohol. They need to, if they have a bottle open or they have a 6-pack on their table, they have until midnight to finish it, and then they need to be done drinking, at least for on premise. Okay. let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Oh, let's see. Get through the amazing comments. Has there been any word on bars, restaurant license renewals being waived or delayed? There is a waiver or a delay in terms of having to renew your license right now. If you have a liquor license, that actually goes until the end of November, November 30th. So if you have a license that expires before November 30th or is due to renew by November 30th, you do not need to renew that liquor license right now. Is the LCB still invoicing you, and is revenue still saying you owe taxes? Yes, because this is a government entity and nothing works clearly, but you do not need to renew your license at this point in time. We are working on trying to get a year off of license renewals. So to give everybody a year where you don't have to renew your license, it would probably be forward thinking. So it would probably be a 2021, no licenses have to be renewed. We're working through that within the legislature, but that does have to be done legislatively. But right now, and we expect that license renewal November 30th date will continue to be pushed farther down just because COVID is still here and the LCB isn't even back to full operations yet. Ben shared 2513 action alert and talking points. I will be updating that today with some specific items relating to the veto override, so stay tuned for that. Last day of session, I think I mentioned this, right now the last day of scheduled session is October 19th, the week of October 19th, 20th, 21, and then we'll see if they schedule more session days after that, depending on the election. Are there any county-specific indoor gathering size restrictions anticipated that would reduce the latest state mandate of 20% of fire code? My hotel is in Montgomery County. Diane, that's actually good. I want to touch upon that. Last week, before the Third Circuit decided that they were going to reinstitute the governor's 25-250 order, a lot of counties were either saying they were going to do 50% or adopting their own mitigation standards. I think Montgomery County was saying if you want to have more than 25 people indoors or outdoors, you needed a permit. Our understanding is that with this new event guidance and with the 25-250 being reinstituted, plus the new guidance, that all the counties are going to align with this new guidance. And I don't expect that to be different. Montgomery County aligned all along until the stay, before the stay was overturned last week. So I would anticipate Philadelphia being the only one that's going to have different guidance from the state at this point in time. But of course, if you do have a county health department, they have the opportunity to be more strict. I don't expect them to, except for the special land of Philadelphia. Tracy is having lunch with Congressman Thompson, who is a good friend of the industry. Is there anything I should emphasize that I don't already know while I have those ears? For any of you, if you are interacting with your federal elected officials, talk about P3. You all need a second drawdown of the P3. That's #1 top priority. That's going to give you some more cash flow that you didn't have before. I think that's the only thing we have a chance of getting done right now. So please bang the drum on the P3. If you want to bang the drum on something else, I'd urge you to bang the drum on liability protection at the federal level. Okay. The minority-owned women veterans, sorry, I went through that very quickly because I feel like I've been talking about the self-certification for longer than anyone should. That applied to the self-certification. So if you self-certify, you have to put in your contact information, your maximum occupancy, and then they ask if you are a minority-owned, women or veteran-owned business. So that's just a question on the self-certification. Does the self-certification apply to wineries and breweries that serve food? If they have indoor capacities that they want to increase to 50%, yes, it doesn't apply to their outdoor capacities. But if it is a winery or a brewery that has seating indoors, and they're not doing it just for private events, they would also need to certify to go to 50% capacity. Let's see. Scroll down a little bit more. Does the 24 people per 1,000 square foot feet still apply for indoor spaces that do not have a stated fire code, or is there some sort of upper level calculus that we'll need to do to figure out if we can actually have people in that room for a private event? I wish I could tell you otherwise, but it requires upper level calculus for this one. It's another change that the administration did. So that 24 per 1,000, which kind of made a lot of sense and made to all of us, they just decided they didn't like that anymore. So you cannot use the 24 per 1,000 in any capacity. All of that simple 24 per 1,000 is not allowed. What you do need to do to figure it out, and don't ask me to figure it out for you because I can't, and Hope is probably laughing in the other room because I've like whimpered over this. One, if you do not have a fire code listed on your occupancy permit or you don't know it, contact your local building code official, because a lot of your townships have your occupancy on file. That's the easiest way to do it. In fact, 95% of Pennsylvania municipalities enforce building codes, so they probably have it. If you do not have a fire code capacity, and we can put the link on here, you have to use a super convoluted Department of Labor egress total square footage within a space times 152.37, some odd calculation that you need to do to figure out what your occupancy is. And we can put that link in there. That you needed to use for your self-certification. You also need to do that in here in terms of for your indoor events. For your outdoor, you're going to be looking at that 67 per 1,000 square feet and then applying the calculator in that scenario. But indoor, it's don't even ask. Contact your township. That's all I can say. That's the only easy answer I can give you. And Ron, I think I just went over the fire code occupancy, and yeah, and Ben did include that in the chat box. I think I went over tents. For tents, again, with the stipulation on tent sides, did you say the tent has to have 2 sides open in order to be considered outdoor? So if there are 3 or 4 sides on the tent, does it then become deemed an indoor event? Like I said, you need to have at least minimum one side open. And like I said, I don't know if they just wrote the FAQ poorly, but I'm going to run with it because that's what the FAQ says. It says you should have 2 sides open, not you must or you have to. So I'm saying at minimum, you need 1 side open. You should have 2 sides open. While all these guidelines deal with indoor and outdoor event facilities, there's no guidance for outdoor events that take place in an open campus like in a downtown, parades or festivals, where there is no gate or entrance and there is no way to control attendance. Hold on. Even the example of the field and the number of people per square feet is impossible to manage or limit in an open campus or festival setting. Where's the governor on these kinds of events? They're trying to wrap those events into this. I mean, they even said that fairs are included in this, that when you have a fair, the map of the fair is how you determine the calculation. As it pertains to parades and things like that, I don't think we have a clear answer on that front, other than they might try and come up with some other calculation for that, since that's what they seem to want to do. You would need to have social distancing in terms of a parade or anything like that. But I don't think that you would be able, at least for a festival, you would have to use it. I mean, for the space that the festival would be within. So if it's within 3 or 4 blocks, you would need to try and calculate that and determine the number of people. But again, this is not an easily enforceable thing. And we know this, not a single thing has been easily enforceable or logical, but they still like to pat themselves on the back for putting it out there. We are a banquet facility. I understand the 20% rule. Can we have dancing? I think I answered all of this. So you can have dancing. They don't want you to dance, but they don't ban dancing. So they want you to have footloose, but you can have dancing. Restrictions on bar service right now, like I said, it looks like they're going to allow your guests to go up to the bar to get a drink. There still has to be a meal as part of it. So obviously it's an all-inclusive, or if it's a cash bar, there still has to be a meal purchased. That's where we stand right now in the guidance. And that includes indoor and outdoor bars as of right now. Cocktail hour. People cannot be standing and drinking. So cocktail hour has to be people sitting at their seats. You can do butler hors d'oeuvres. Again, people can't be standing and eating. So none of that has changed in terms of your cocktail hours. The whole butts need to be in seats to eat or drink is still part of the restrictions right now. Remember the governor's $225 million grant program, which is open to hospitality, including restaurants. Can you please add that to your coverage? We applied for 40K and have all of the favored criteria, except we did get some first round PPP. They just did the 225. That's not necessary. The 225 is not in play there's a few different grant programs, and we can reiterate this in the daily update again. You have your county grant programs, you have your small business grant programs that are run through DCED and some of your local organizations. And then the 225 proposal that the governor has, it includes 100 million for restaurants. That's actually a legislative push that has not gotten across the finish line. So there are grant programs that restaurants can apply for. There is not the specific restaurant grant program, but we are working on that, like I said, legislatively. I have 2 separate dining rooms. Can I use this calculation per room? So it depends, Susan. If your separate dining rooms are strictly for private events, yes. But if they are part of your larger footprint, then you could use your 50% for the totality of the space. So it depends how you're using your rooms. If they're specifically for private events, but they're part of your overall arching footprint, you can only have 20% in each of those spaces. So like I said, if you have a back room and your total capacity is 100 for your total restaurant, and you have 2 back rooms, you can only put 20 in one back room, 20 in another back room, and then you can only have 60 through the rest of the restaurant. With Philly's move to 50% capacity, do you think they will still override other aspects of House Bill 2513 once that comes into effect? I mean, I think Philadelphia, and I've mentioned this before, health departments can have their own further restrictions. So even if 2513 passes, Philadelphia can still have more strict restrictions because they're authorized on a whole different section of the law. So yes, if 2513 passes, Philadelphia could still say you can't have bar seating or you still have to get a meal. I think that answered that question. Correct. Philadelphia will make an announcement next week if they're going to change the rules for Philadelphia. I think I answered the grant program. Yeah, so for the tents, you have to use the outdoor calculation. I mean, for the space, if you have a tent, this is I'm so sorry, I hate the governor right now. So if you have a tent and you're having a wedding within the tent and people are going to be staying within the tent, that is what you're using to determine your square footage. So you're using that calculation, which is why it's truly terrible, because your tent that you could comfortably socially distance 150, depending on this new calculation, it might be reduced, and we're seeing it being reduced, and we're trying to get the governor to move on this. Now, if you extend and put tables outside of the tent or establish a space outside of the tent for guests to congregate or maybe put some chairs and things, or maybe a nice little seating area, you could extend the footprint of the tent outside of the tent walls. So it's the footprint of where you're having the event that you're going to be using to determine your calculation. Now, do I think you can have a tent with 2 walls down and you decide that you're going to extend it 100 feet each way, but nobody's ever out in that 100 feet each way? I don't think that's going to fly. But definitely try and use some of that outdoor space outside of the tent to increase your occupancy number until we get some reason within this administration. I feel bad. A lot of you probably are half lit right now because of the drinking game I established during this call. 2513, drink again. Sometimes we use our ballrooms for events that are open to the public through advanced reservations. Is this still a private event in a private space, or does it qualify as a restaurant event space where we're at 50% instead of 20%? If you are using your ballroom for the public, so Melissa Bova comes in with my family and I want a table because it's brunch, that is considered a restaurant space. So it's not just the fact that you're calling it a ballroom that makes it private. If you're serving the public in that space, if you've expanded your footprint into that space, 50% is your capacity. If I'm coming in for a wedding, then the 20% would apply. So it's not based on the space, what it's called itself. It's based on the event that you're having within the space. Tastings at breweries, same as tastings at winery. Like, that's actually really interesting because I don't think that I'm going to the question. Yes, it does apply to breweries too. So yes, I apologize for my breweries. I did not mean to discriminate against you. Yes, you can do 5 1-ounce pours as well. Yes, with the 20% indoors, I read you still have to be 6 feet apart. Correct. So social distancing, mask wearing, meal requirement, all are still in place. Nothing's changed on that front. So your tables still need to be 6 feet apart, even with the 20%. And at 20%, you can probably put them 12 feet apart. People can get a microphone to talk to the person at the table next to them. For tents, what about 3 walls and a 4th wall that's partially open to vent? If you have airflow, I mean, they're saying it can't be completely enclosed. I just have airflow. Don't have 4 walls completely down to the ground. That's all I have for you right now. It does, like I said, all it says is that it should be 2 walls open, not that it has to be, and all 4 walls down is indoor. Anything in between, I say go for it. And then if you get really creative, send it to me so I can show it to other people. With the walk-up bar service, yes.
Melissa, can I butt in for 1 second?
Yeah.
One of the things that is frustrating is the vagueness of some of the regulations. And we've heard from our members and non-members that the enforcement has been all over the board. It's been haphazard in how things are being enforced. And as we pointed out on the call, is part of the problem with the enforcers is not the actual enforcers. The guidelines are so vague that they can be interpreted so many different ways that it makes it hard for enforcement. So what this is going to lead to at the tents is some people are going to enforce that you have to have 2 sides up, and some are going to enforce that you should have 2 sides up, because it should be, and that leads to frustration for Melissa and even more frustration for all of you. And I apologize for that, but we've made this point repeatedly and we can't quite get these things right. So anyway, that's why it's hard for us to make recommendations because the guidelines are so ambiguous. Melissa?
So I had a question. There's a question about walk-up bar service. Can it only be allowed during dinner service then, or could walk-up bar service occur before or after the dinner portion of the event? As long as they are consuming a meal, as long as a meal is, or not even consuming, as long as there is a meal applied, they can go and get a drink before and after an event at a private event. So you just have to check the meal box. And like I said, people don't have to eat, but there has to be meal on the general tab or as part of the event. Okay. Can you please elaborate on the misdemeanor charges and $1,000 fine for any operation that is certified but found to breaking restrictions? Were these penalties loosened or addressed by the governor? So the misdemeanor charges we did get addressed. And that's that unsworn falsification that was keeping us all up at night a couple of weeks ago. The misdemeanor unsworn falsification provision only applies to if you fill out the self-certification and you lie, like blatantly lie. Like, for example, I'm Melissa Bova and I'm the owner of Melissa's Bar and Grill and Puppy Dog Bar, and I say John Longstreet's the owner when he's clearly not. And then they find out that on my liquor license, very clearly John Longstreet isn't the owner. So it's if you blatantly lie on that certification, that's where the misdemeanor applies. The $1,000 fines, those are actually fines already allowed to be administered by the LCE and Department of Ag. So those are already authorized. So you can be fined. The fining isn't tied to if you certify or not. Being fined is universally, if you're breaking the rules, they can fine you up to $1,000 per violation. For a private event, was there a change in restrictions for number of people per table? Do we still follow the green phase restrictions or number of people per table, or will there be an update on that piece? I can tell you right now, the guidance under the governor's restaurant guidance says they recommend no more than 10 people at a table. It's not a requirement. So there is still not a restriction on number of people at a table unless you're in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, you are restricted to 6 people at an outdoor table, 4 people at an indoor table. Okay, let's see. For hotels that host religious services in one part of the ballroom, separated by an air wall, do those guests count in total allowed occupancy for other part of the ballroom? I.e. total allowed occupancy for a whole ballroom at 20% is 100. The 50 people for religious service, since religious services are exempt, can we host a private event on the other side for more than 50 people, staff included, properly socially distanced, etc.? If you're cutting the space in half, so if the whole space in and of itself is for 100 people, and you're putting a religious ceremony, this is like calculus, in one half of it, the space that you have left is actually half of the space you started with. So you couldn't do the full 20% in half of the space. So the religious exemption, so if you have a whole room, you cut it in half and you put 50 people here and you're allowed to have 100 people total, you can't put 100 people on the other side of the ballroom because it's half the space than what the occupancy allowed for. So you could have 200 people for a religious ceremony in there because they are exempt, but you can't use the same occupancy for half the amount of space. I hope that makes sense. Man, this is, I'm gonna go have a glass of wine, hot dog after this.
That might be the most creative question of the day too.
Oh, wait, okay, hold on. Sorry, I'm just laughing at this one. Is there any update to the restrictions regarding guests being upright? Can guests hang out at a high top or visit another table vertically as long as they have a mask on? What about dancing? Is dance floors restricted if they are wearing a mask? So they can go, people can go to another table if they want. They have to wear a mask. So again, that provision still applies. If you are not in a seat, you have to have your mask. So I can go talk to you. I can go the 12 feet from my table to the other table because you can only fit 20% in there, but I have to wear my mask when I do that. And I can stand and I can talk to someone there. I can't eat or drink while I'm standing. And if I go to the dance floor, I am allowed to dance. I have to have my mask on, and it has to be like in middle school where everybody's 6 feet apart and nobody wants to touch. So those are the restrictions for walking and visiting other people. Does Allegheny County send out any rules where and when we receive nothing from state and local? So this is right. This is kind of the frustrating thing. And I think I've said this before in the guidance. I'm like, when somebody doesn't say anything, it means that they're aligning with the guidance. But I do think at Allegheny's press conference today, they will say that they are aligning with the guidance. Will they put out a press release about that? That's another question. But we will be watching that 4 p.m. press conference and we'll include it in today's update. Oh man, I just want to make sure I understand the tent calculation. Example, an 80 by 100 tent is 8,000 square feet. Yeah, you did get it right. 67, because I spent, and Hope is going to laugh again, Hope and I spent too much time yesterday trying to understand these new calculations and figure it out. 80 by 110 is 8,000 square feet. 67 people per 1,000 square feet is 536 people. 20% of this is 107, correct? Yes, that is correct. But that's why that 80 by 100 tent, before your weddings, you were probably putting, 200 people under that tent with your table socially distanced. So that's the biggest frustration we have right now, is because of the fact that this new calculation for your tent capacity actually just slashed your tent capacity. And like I said, the governor's office said they'll be updating the calculation, but they did not tell me how they would be updating the calculation. And we do have, it was in the announcement yesterday, there is the orders have come out from the Department of Health and the governor's office regarding the legal notice, the enforcement mechanism for all of this. And Ben might have already posted that in there. That was in the press release from yesterday. Michelle, welcome to the thing I've been flagging for weeks. PA guidance lists disposable menus as a recommendation, and then later states reusable menus are prohibited. Do we know which is correct? No, and I can explain. This is what happens when you have 6 different versions of guidance that I have flagged for the administration, and it's driving me crazy. There was a part in the governor's restaurant regulations that had 3 items that were prohibited in the yellow stage of reopening. And that included, you could not have reusable condiments on the table during the yellow phase. You could not have reusable menus unless they were tablets you could wipe down. And you could not bring your own growler in to be refilled at a brewery. They changed that. And then, well, then green happened. So all of those became moot points. And then again, they changed it. And so now there's a conflict within the guidance. We believe that you can use reusable menus if they're wiped down in between, but the guidance is contradictory on that. And trust me, can't tell you how many times I have flagged this for the administration to correct. And as John said, it's frustrating for us because every day I feel like I find another disconnect within the guidance. Does staff counts apply as a whole, or does it apply to each space as we have separate staff for meeting rooms and meal rooms? Katie, if you have the same staff going into multiple rooms, they're going to count within that. Now, if you've separated your staff, so in one room, you have the same 3 staff members that service that room, and in another room, you have 3 different people, then they would be segregated to each room. But if you have the 6 people going between the same rooms, you would need to count the 6 people in each room. So if they're crossing over between rooms, you need to count them. We do have, where would I find the talking points again on meeting with and emailing officials? We do have a link up there. The information on there is still good. You should still use it, but we'll be updating it again because we want to make it more hard hitting in terms of letting legislators know that we are watching their vote on 2513. And if they do not support the industry, we aren't going to make it. So we're going to make it a little bit more forceful than, and you thought we were forceful about it before, it's going to get worse. So that will be getting updated, but those points I think were a little earlier in the form. The waiver form I found for the liquor license fee is a fee of $250 for a late filing fee. They still need to pay that fee. Sorry, just trying to clarify so that I can help out our local restaurants and bars. If they want to pay, they do not need to pay the $250 fee, but they don't have to pay. If they pay the $250 fee, and some of them who have tried to pay, it's requiring them to pay the $250 late fee, the LCB is reimbursing that because their system is not intuitive. So therefore, when you go, let's say it's $1,000, let's make it easy. And they're saying that it's $250 late fee. So you go and pay just the $1,000 and the LCB says that's no good because you owe $1,250. If you have to pay the $1,250, they will reimburse you the $250. And if they don't, let me know. But that is the process. If people do decide they want to pay and they're assessing the late fee. And like I said, the problem with the LCB is they're coming up with policies to try and be helpful, but their computer system, I don't know if you heard, their entire ordering system is crashed right now. Their computer system doesn't really reflect what they're trying to implement. So there's a definite disconnect between the two. Can you clarify the restaurant certification when it's hosting a private event? I heard you say something about 30 people in the main restaurant and potentially 20 people for a private event as an example. If the restaurant is closed for the private event only, does the 50% restaurant capacity apply or the 20% for private events apply? If it's closed for a private event only, it's the 20%. So those are the rules. 50% if you're open to the public and you have a private event in another room, and that private event can be 20% and you can see your remaining 30% in the rest of the dining room. But if you shut down your restaurant to have a Christmas party, your capacity is only 20%. There's a question on the PRLA website. Would it be possible to put links front and center on the first page, landing page with the following state legislators' contact information and party affiliation so we can find it quickly, and to the talking points. So we used to pick up one or two to emphasize. And every week after this call is readily accessible and we can take action without digging around and losing momentum to make the calls. I will leave that to staff. I mean, we do have a pretty straightforward landing page for 2513 that has the talking points, the contact information, and the party affiliation of the legislators. We can maybe put another link on our main page that will link you back to that landing page. Will it be a larger press release statement of the change of bar service, not seating for restaurants, or will it be slipped into the FAQ? It's going to be slipped into the FAQ. I'm already refreshing, waiting for it. Are we waiting to hear about that sooner than later? I just want to make sure I print it every day if that's the case. It's this afternoon. The administration did, that's one thing they did tell me for certain in the email today. They will be updating the FAQ this afternoon, and the bar service piece will be updated as part of that. So yes, if you have printed it out, we're all going to have to print it out all over again when that's updated again. And they said this afternoon. I know we've talked a lot about tents, but any updates or insights on winterization for restaurants / streeteries? Not sure how this will work without tent walls. There is an active conversation in Philadelphia. I know Ben Fletcher, our Director of Operations and Strategy for the Philadelphia region, is part of that. There is work on that within Philadelphia itself. We've been requesting a call with the governor's office because I would like to talk to them a little bit about what they think would work in terms of being creative for outdoor space and seating. And of course, the last call we had was yesterday. So we're hoping to still get a call set up and get some guidance from the governor's office on that front. But for Philadelphia, there are active groups that are working on that, and the administration should be coming out with guidance on that front soon. I can tell you it's been frustrating because members of City Council in Philadelphia have been asking for this guidance since August to try and prepare, and we're still waiting for it. Does the 75% total occupancy of a conference center still apply with 20% occupancy of each meeting room? I'm not aware of 75% occupancy for a conference center right now. Maybe I'm missing something, but for private events, it's going to be 20% of your occupancy. And you can, that's a question that we've gotten a lot as well. If you have a giant space and you want to separate it, or you have a convention center and you want to separate it, you do need a wall to floor separation. You can't just put a curtain up in that scenario. But each meeting room for a private event, 20%, depending on your occupancy, that's still going to be applied. Let's see. So tents outside of restaurants to expand outdoor dining. This is not an event, correct? No, it's not an event, but the tent restrictions apply. So the new capacity numbers, that 24 per 1,000 is just a really, really nice memory that made a lot of sense at the time that it was in place. And now you have to use this convoluted, well, no, actually, no, your outdoor dining, you're still, the new calculation only applies to events. So your outdoor dining, as far as we can tell, for a public service is still social distancing. And I guess the 24 per 1,000 would still apply in that scenario. I don't think they actually thought through that. But this new calculation only applies to private events. So I would still continue with your outdoor seating, your social distancing. Yeah, I mean, Melissa's Puppy Bar, I should open it. Macy is going to be the general manager and she's going to do a phenomenal job. It's going to be great. But if you do go to the Puppy Bar, Macy will drink all of your wine and beer. So be careful. Put a hand over your glass. Thank you, Phil. It's been this week. Every week I keep on saying, maybe this week's going to be slow. And it just hasn't happened for like the last 8 weeks. Thank you, Michael, for the thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right. What about a semi-private event? If you have a semi-private event, does that technically mean the capacity for the event is 50%? So you could have 1-2 top available for general service and use the whole rest for a private party. A private event in a specific space is going to be 20%. If you're a restaurant and it's a table within the restaurant, and it's not a private separate space, then it would be the 50% applied in that scenario, unless I'm missing something, John, because I'm an hour and a half in and my head hurts.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that I understand the semi-private events. I understand that there are some events that may be sort of private where they're open to the public, and that's already been talked about earlier. They're special events, but they're open to the public. So I'm not really sure that I understand that to make this determination.
But heck, we'll have more guidance this afternoon.
Offline.
Yes, and thank you, Allison. City of Pittsburgh is also working on winterization guidance too. And Steph did put a link to 2513, and we can add it to the advocacy pull down too. So it's been, all of our quick links have been linked to COVID specifically, but we can work on that. Thank goodness that's above my pay grade. I think I'm at the end.
You're at the end. You're at the end. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we will record, this is recorded, we will send it out. Please check the daily update later today with additional guidance as we find it out. With that, I'm going to go rub Melissa's shoulders to make sure she's okay over there.
Thank you, Melissa. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Hang in there.